To date, with our pivot tables, we've restricted ourselves to choosing a single field in the row option, or in the column option, or in the data option. We did see multiple fields in the page filtering option, but not in each of the other 3 data areas. Now we can, if it makes sense and looks correct, actually add multiple columns into any or all of those areas. So if we take our data that's in the employees file and insert a new pivot table, so it's selecting the correct data source and we'll have it in a new worksheet, we could actually add town and city into the rows and the marital status into the rows. And you can see we then get a heading option. So we have towns are first, so Durham, and then the 3 marital status for Durham, Hartlepool, but then there are only 2 marital status, so it's all based on the data. So effectively we're filtering by Hartlepool, and then we see just the Hartlepool employees. And in the value section, we'll have the salary, and let's change its count to sum. So you can see there we now have some sub-headings, which are the marital status. And if you wanted to go even further, you could add a 3rd option. Now the order of the grouping is determined by the order that your little blocks appear in here. So I want to have the gender below town and below marital status. Let's move marital status up 1. So then you can see the filtering on a few levels. We have Durham and its grand total, married and its grand total, the number of males and their grand total, divorced, grand total, and single, grand total. And then the same happens again for Hartlepool, breaks down into its different marital status, of which there are only 2, and then divorced only has 1 gender. So the subheadings, although there are more values within that column in the whole data set, once you start filtering by having multiple levels as we have, you only see the levels with values. Now it may be that I would like to have also in the mathematical section, so in the center here, an ID count. So let's drop ID in there and make sure it's chosen count, and it hasn't, it's gone for sum. Change that to count. And that way we can compare 2 data values here. We have the total salary and the number of people. So we can see it's 1 person constitutes that data, but 11 at the top level for Durham, but 9 of them are single and 9 of them are actually female. So the breakdown is very useful for looking at this internal data. Now once you start adding multiple levels, you also get the option here for compressing and expanding. So I can use the minus and the plus signs against each of these to either expand or compress. In this case, my marital status. So if I click the plus on Mar there, all the marital status is expand. I then see the gender options. If I compress, they all compress. I can compress towns. So Middlesbrough goes in, Newcastle goes in, Northampton goes in, but the other towns stay out. So this multi-level grouping can actually be quite useful in a pivot table. Obviously, the levels that you choose have to make some kind of logical sense and be in the correct order. So that's where I've placed them in the rows and placed them as town, then marital status, then sex. And then the values in the middle are firstly summing the salary, which is why I see some salary first, and then counting the IDs. Once you have multiple levels of grouping, you can then expand and contract those multiple levels using the plus and the minus option. Now you can also expand and contract using the Pivot Table Tools ribbon and the Analyze sub-ribbon. Over here we have a little plus and a minus sign. If you hover, one says collapse the field and the other says expand the field. So if I were to choose Durham and then collapse, it collapses all the towns, so everything at that level effectively gets collapsed. And if I click the plus, everything at that level gets expanded. And the same would happen with the marital status for married. I can plus to expand them all, or minus to collapse them all. Whereas at the top level, so with the towns, I can actually collapse one town at a time by clicking the plus and the minus sign. But that only happens at the top level, so the outer grouping. At all other levels, when you plus or minus every heading with that same heading, so in this case div, gets expanded or collapsed. If you want all of the towns to collapse, you need to use this minus. Otherwise, just clicking each one does one at a time. So that's multiple levels of row, and you can do the same with columns. We could add in multiple column values in here to get multiple headings going across. What you really need to avoid though is some very complicated pivot tables because you try to drag in too many fields. Usually you would be better looking at multiple pivot tables. If, however, it makes logical sense, as we have here, you can pull in multiple fields into your rows, into your columns, and into your values section.